All right, Chris, why don't we get rolling here as other folks are joining in. So good morning, everybody. Just want to do some quick introductions and we'll get started. I'm Paul Fahey. I'm Vice President at Overit Media and one of the key, not only research, but account strategists for a number of our clients across a number of different verticals. Joining me live in the studio is...
Good morning, everyone. Chris Fasano here. I'm a marketing strategist and direct the digital efforts at Overit, and excited to be back with you for round two with this really important data and discussion that we're going to have this morning. So thanks for having me back.
So yeah, as Chris just mentioned, this is round two. About a week and a half or so ago, we did a pretty comprehensive report on our findings from a research survey we conducted mid-May. So on the 18th, we took participants through, I guess, about a dozen questions or so. This was a survey of Capital Region consumers, asking them specifically about their what's changed about them during COVID, how do they anticipate their changes in consumer behavior in the future. And so it was a great presentation. We dove into crosstabs pretty deeply to get a sense of not only what the broader issues were, but how that might vary by age. And a lot of questions came up after the presentation. We had a lot of questions during the presentation. So as Chris and I were just comparing notes and chatting in the hallway, so to speak, kind of said, hey, there's a few common themes here, and maybe it would be of value or interest to folks to have us revisit some of those top questions. Specifically, when are consumers going to be returning to business? What are their shopping interests and hesitations? How do they feel about the future? What impacted them? How did the COVID and unemployment and other economic indicators affect them in the short term? What's their outlook? How do we speak to this new consumer? And I think that topic came up quite a lot. And if there's time, I think we'll even cover some of the changes in media trends and how we've adapted to speak to this new consumer. As Chris mentioned, we also really want to make this a dialogue. We want to make it very relevant. So if there are specific questions, please type those in the chat. As we go through, we'll try to answer them as we go along. I think we had slated about a half hour for this presentation. We'll kind of go long, so if you want to stick with us, if it's kind of rolling through. And if there's time at the end, there's some innovations that we want to share. Companies that have specifically pivoted and either developed new products or adapted their business in response to what was happening with the pandemic. Some really, really innovative, some just really fun examples, but all of it, I think, very interesting. So if there's time, we'll share some of those with you pretty quickly. I think you'll find that of interest. So what's the situation? Over the last couple days, actually, many of you probably saw Eric Anderson's article in the Times-Union. We're now into deeper phases of recovery, depending on what county you're in, what industry you're in. Businesses are starting to ramp up, and signs of recovery happening Capital Region and elsewhere. So as we're emerging from the bunker, the thing I think on everyone's mind is how soon we're going to return back to normal, how quickly is the economy going to rebound, and what's the new consumer going to be like? How have they changed? What can we learn about them, and how can we adapt our business to them? And that's what we'll cover in the next few minutes or so. And I've just mentioned this. So who is this new consumer? What did we learn? How did they change? As a quick summary to our last presentation, and we're not going to share all of the questions, but in brief summary, in general, most of the people in the Capital Region that we surveyed have reprioritized their spending. They are worried about the regional economy, though showing signs of optimism. There are concerns about employment. I think I was actually surprised, and I think Chris was too, that concern about their health was one of the top concerns, more so than employment or the region's economy. About half the people we surveyed are the same financially as they were a year ago. A third are worse, and the rest are better off actually now than they were a year ago. Thinking ahead, 2/3 either said that they think that they'll be the same as they are now financially, or they'll be better off a year from now. So there's a sense of, in general, optimism, but not insignificant portion of the region that does feel affected by this. a couple of the major trends that we explored in our last presentation is this emerging sense of herd identity. And when we presented this on May 18th, it was a sense that we're all in this together. If we work together, we can help flatten the curve, we can help lessen the impacts of the pandemic. But now, actually, with a lot of the social conversations that have been happening around the country, I think that's even tightening up groups and perhaps in some cases polarizing groups. But that herd identity, that sense that we're all in this together, has even, taken hold in other topics. And in general, and we can talk about this a little bit later, we've seen people stay with brands that they trust. There's not a lot of aggressive switching of brands unless there is a shortage. If there is a shortage, then I'm going to go to 4 grocery stores until I can find the products that I need, but I'm going to do that reluctantly. There is a sense of even keel that people do want to minimize any of that disruption, and I think Chris speaks of this very often. In general, people want a sense of control. And that sense of staying with a trusted brand. I have a relationship with them. I have I don't want to switch into something else and have one more thing in my life that's uncertain. So those are some generalizations of who this new consumer is, and we'll get into some of this a little bit more specifically.
Hey, Paul, I'm just going to add a point to that
Yes.
summary. Is that when we looked, so we looked at, and we'll show a little bit of this, but we did look to see how the answers broke down with age, right? And one of the things that really stood out in the data, I think across all the questions, was that the younger demographic was more likely to exhibit change. They're the ones that are more likely going to pivot and change their consumer behaviors. 18 to 35 really is where we saw them more, they would answer one thing here and one thing here. So they were very dynamic, and that just speaks to where their mindset is in their current situation. The younger you are in this current pandemic, the possibly more uncertain you are, right? You're building a career, you have a young family, you're concerned about your finances, maybe more to the extent that an older person might be. So what we think coming out of this is if you have goods and services that cater to the younger demographic, you're really going to have to pay attention to the behavior and make sure you're speaking and pivoting to where their new needs lie, because they're the ones that are going to be sort of, if you're not really going to speak to them, they will move and find another brand that will speak to their current needs. And so I think that was one thing that came out. I'm looking at a question here, Paul, that's just relevant real quick. Tanya Underwood is asking about, in our survey, did we ask, so we can give a sort of crosstab on how those answers relate to people that are employed and unemployed. And that's a great question, Tanya. We did not, correct, Paul? And so, correct. But I think that if, sorry, I think I froze a little bit if you guys didn't hear me, but Tanya was asking about, were people who took the survey, did we indicate employed or unemployed? And we didn't, but I would presume that the data shows that, in that younger demographic is where a lot of the unemployment and that younger sort of focus fell. So if we did ask that, I would imagine we would see that come out, but we did not. And that's a good point, and that's a good question for us to assess in the future. So that's my take on that, Paul.
Yeah, and let me use this as a jumping off point. What we saw in this survey was a good representation of the capital region. And keeping in mind that the capital region in upstate New York, was less impacted per capita than, New York City, which is a very hot spot for that. However, we all have the same sort of economic issues, but in general, the capital region has always done better than the nation in terms of weathering any economic downturn. So when you think about the housing boom in the mid-2000s, we didn't have the highs that Florida and Las Vegas did, but when it crashed, we didn't have those lows. Our region has always been, driven by municipal government, healthcare, and higher education. Now with a lot of emerging innovation technologies. And so as a result, our economy tends to be more stable than other parts of the country. Perhaps that's why our survey findings might look different from what we see and read and, at the national headline level. So important thing to keep in mind as we're going through. So Chris, let me get to some of the questions here and figure out how to clear there it
Yeah,
is.
and I see some questions coming in, so you guys please just type them in, and we'll get to them shortly.
Yep. So one of the things we asked, and this came up a lot offline afterward, was the changes that people are going to be making, in response to, this bunker that we've been in for the last 3 months. What are the changes that we see and we're going to make in our lives moving forward? So Chris, what did you see here? And what are the common themes that popped up? And then we'll kind of go into some of the questions that we received based on.
I mean, this was an interesting question. I think we were surprised, like you said, to see the health and fitness. People. One thing that's good that comes out of this whole thing is that people are going to put more value on the value of being human. Taking care of yourself, interacting with other humans. I think isolation sort of has really done that to us. It has made us value being alive and being healthy, and also being able to share that with other people. So I think we see that here, but also we do see a range of answers. Return to college, you have a little bit, and that was more of the younger demographic, right? We see learning more about personal finance is really interesting. And we talked about this last time, especially in the younger demographic. I think this is going to put more people's finances into focus. People that are close to retiring have obvious maybe are now forced to say, hey, what am I doing with my money? Do I have enough money saved if this were to happen again? So obviously that has an impact in the financial sectors. I did just notice by the demographic, which really struck me is how it shifts by age. And I think the younger persona really was really the one, the more dynamic. One of the questions that came in after this, Paul, about these changes, do you anticipate making any of the following changes? We will change. The question that I got was, do you envision the consumer changing forever? In other words, if you have a product that you're selling and you've been selling it for 10 years to a certain type of person, how do you anticipate the change? How is it going to last? And how in your marketing and your sales do you accommodate that? And then it's an interesting question. I do think that you're going to have people that might permanently change, but I don't think it's necessary to really think about that at the point. I think what you're going to find is people are changing now. So you have to be able to accommodate what that change is now. And then as the trust comes back and as people come back more online, maybe it does go back, but I think that you are going to have a cohort of people that are going to be more digital, more online, but you're going to grow with them. I think that the goal of the business should be to just keep engaging them through this time, speak to what they're talking about now, and not worry about how it affects them down the line. What do you think about that question, Paul?
Yes, I think there are behaviors that we're going to see become more permanent. But it's hard to say how long. Well, first off, it's hard to say how long this is going to last. It does seem like we flattened the curve. It does seem like we're emerging from the bunker, and we are starting to get back to normal. Is there going to be a second wave? And if there is, that I think will impact things more so. But we've become a lot more open to things like distance learning or online events. Many of us, I think, found that we're able to be more productive. I can go to 10 or 12 meetings a day where I might have only had time in my day for 5 or 6 because I'm driving to a couple of them and I've got some of that downtime. So I think there are going to be a lot of changes, and I think, delivery, drive-through, any businesses that were in place beforehand, food delivery services and apps, really, really benefited from that. And I think consumers got to change some of that behavior, and that's, I think, probably one of the biggest challenges and one of the bigger themes for businesses is how do you regain and how do you re-engage customers at the right time and either separate them from those other modes or, get them back into your business. And we'll talk about that, I think, in a minute. Anything else on this slide, Chris? I'll move on.
Yeah, no, let's move on. I want to make sure we get to some of the questions today.
Yep. And this is the crosstabs from the last question. So what we wanted to show here was, how does this vary by age? And what you saw before was sort of a one size fits all. This is all the issues. But, and Chris, you can take us through this. I think it's interesting to note, for instance, returning to college, not surprising. I think that skews younger. Where 65 plus just aren't planning on making that change to their lives. But where did we see in here anything else that might be of interest or relevance?
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway all the way on the right column, no significant changes to my life, that green arrow, at increasing in age, you are more likely to not really care to change. And so the younger you are, the more likely you are to change and make significant changes in your life. That has obvious impacts and real world business implications, right? So 18 to 30, 35s are saying, they're definitely changing in some way. Also, again, in the 25 to 44 range, even 18 and up, learn about my personal financial security. That is the most green. Those people are really want to learn more, which is excellent. I mean, these are positives to take away here. Change my career path, Paul. Again, if you're in that sort of anxiety prone age range, you're going to think about it. You're going to really think about anything you have to do. People have gone into some sort of survival mode. And not just thinking about right now, they're thinking about later on in life. Maybe it's making them think about if they're in an industry that is really sort of, or a business industry that could be affected by something like this drastically, maybe they're going to look to be something that's more secure or more essential, or something that is going to be around. I know we market for a lot of essential businesses, and that for Overit has been something that has been nice because they are still in business. So along the same vein, if I'm in an industry or a sector that's not, like, for example, if I'm in the restaurant, world, I might consider getting a job or finding a new career path that might be a little more sort of can withstand if something like this happens. So, but really clearly, the young people are changing, and we're really going to have to address that.
And part of what I see there goes back to my comment a minute ago about our region's economic stability. Certainly folks that are older, are more likely to be on pensions or in retirement and less dependent upon, service-based jobs or things like that. So if you think about, again, the municipalities, the pensions that are there, the healthcare and higher education, those folks may be less impacted economically than younger age groups.
And there was just a question that came in along this. So let me just answer it now. The question is the older or younger consumer more anxious? It seems as though the younger consumers will be more apprehensive moving forward. So, Paul, that I study this a lot, mental health and anxiety in particular, how it relates to consumers. And their new study just came out. It was really interesting, showing that the older you are, the more likely you are to get very sick from this disease. However, the older you are, the less anxious you are actually about it. And so it's inversely proportional. The younger you are and the more healthy you are, the less physically impacted you might be, but you are the most anxious. The data from these surveys show the younger you are, the more anxious you are about life in general. And so again, if I am anxious about not just the pandemic, but I have now unease and I am uncertain. Well, I saw what could happen to my job. I saw what can happen to my kids. I saw what can happen when they're not in school. I've come out of this feeling very unsettled, almost like the rug has been pulled out. And at any time, it can happen again. So with that unsettled, I now have to go out into the world and resume my life and my purchases and my consumer behavior. So yes, I do think the younger consumer is more anxious and more hesitant, but they're also more willing to adjust. So there's an opportunity in that anxiety. You have an opportunity as a business to calm the anxieties, calm the uncertainty, make people feel like, listen, we hear you, we understand you're uncertain, but here are all of the certain things you can expect when you come back. I'm going to go get my hair cut today, Paul, for the first time. I'm really looking forward to that. And I was really nervous and uncomfortable, but I was instructed on all of the things. You got to make an appointment. We're going to be wearing masks. There's only going to be 4 or 5 people, at one time. You're going to wait in your car until all of those things checked my anxiety boxes and made me feel a lot more at ease. So I do think you have to approach it by age. And if you're serving and catering to a younger demographic, you have to be aware that that is the most anxious group, and you really need to knock those down as much as you can.
There's a great question from Jay that I know we'll get to. We actually have a specific slide addressing some of those for organizations that really depend on event-based. Yep. So we'll get to that one in a second. So these next 2 slides and questions that we had asked are really about sort of consumer outlook. Do we think it's a good time to make a major purchase, such as a home or a car or a boat? And Chris, give me a quick summary here, and we'll flip over to the next slide, and I think talk about changes in consumer behavior and what can we do to alleviate those concerns that you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, this was also interesting to me too. Do you think the next 6 months will be a good or bad time for people to make a major purchase? I thought that there'd be bad percent, and it wasn't. I mean, you have a lot of people who are somewhere in between, and even some people that say good time. You do see that glaring chunk of 40% that's bad time. But I think that really it obviously speaks to the situation and the age. But I do think that there's room, Paul. Like we talked about it, if you present me with a good offer and there's something out there that I wanted and now seems like a good time because people are offering certain financing or certain deals, and I'm in that orange bar, I might jump in. So Paul and I were joking about a pool. Everyone's on this pool kick, and like I would never really consider that, and I probably still won't buy it, but I'm thinking about it. And it's just because people are in different mindsets, and in different mindsets you can purchase different things. So I think, Paul, as a business, you present the right offer, knock down those anxieties, and I think we can shift some of those bars into the green kind of version, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you are in this business and you want to encourage people and remind them that this is a great time, I think what you need to do to move those somewhere in betweens into a good time, or perhaps even convert some of the bad times, is just educating them on. So take home, for instance, reminding me that the interest rates are never at a better or at almost all-time lows. In the case of a car or a boat, we've seen national brands say, if you lose your job because of COVID, we'll make your payments for the next year. Warranties are going to be particularly important. Anything that we can do to mitigate risk, and as you had said, Chris, that alleviate that sense of anxiety will be important.
This is also where, for businesses, and where good nurture comes into play, Paul. We talk about this a lot with our clients. People don't purchase things right away, especially right now, but they're still listening and they're still out there and they're still taking in information. And this is why a really strong automated nurture strategy this time is really helpful, because if you're delivering information to your customers or your prospectives, they might not be buying your product now, but it may just be because it's the situation right now. But 3 months from now, 4 months from now, they'll be ready and they have all of the information because you've been delivering it to them. So don't be afraid to keep delivering and nurturing your clients and educating them about your products. And then when they're ready, they'll sort of jump on it. So keep the conversation going.
And this next question, really kind of similar to the previous, are you going to prioritize essential, home services, or I think you can extend this to other types of services, over home improvements or upgrades, such as that new patio furniture or a pool or something else? And it looked, to us, I think that people were saying, yes, I think in the coming year, I'm probably going to be focusing on more of those things. So, Chris, for businesses like pest control or air conditioning, home heating and air conditioning, I even think about businesses like dry cleaners that depend on people going to the office and having a lot more in-person presence, or car wash. I'm not using my car. I'm getting 3 weeks to the gallon, I think, right now.
Right.
Can we force these businesses to, or consumers rather, to re-engage in these businesses? What should their strategies be at this point?
Yeah. So this is a great question. My services aren't needed right now. How do I get consumers to buy them? Or can we force them into the funnel? And I think that that's something we don't want to do. But I do think what we want to do is, again, keep engaging them. I think we don't want to go dark, and we don't want to be, okay, well, we'll reemerge when you need me again. I don't think that's the right approach. I think that what you have to do is stay out on social media, talk to people. It doesn't even have to be about your product. Have conversations with them. Even engage in pop culture, if you will. Just get to their level, talk to them, engage with them, send them information, because what you're doing is you're keeping the brand trust alive. And then when it's time, they will make a natural progression back to someone that is engaging with them in that time. And if you're speaking to them and talking to them on their level, where else are they going to go? They're going to make that natural progression back. I think along the lines with pest control and HVAC, even, with banking, with essential services, remind them that you're an essential service in some way. That's one of the things we talked about with pest control. People might not consider pest control to be an essential service, but it is. And you need to let your customers know that, hey, we're here for you. We're open right now. We are doing things because it's really important to have pest control. Here are the reasons why. Or our banks might be closed, the lobbies, but here's how we can service you and here's how we can help you digitally. I think you just really have to meet people where they are. Don't force them to buy or come to your service, but just let them know where you are and get on their level. The more you can humanize yourself, their transition back will be a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think we're at a point right now where those brands, to your point, can stay top of mind. They don't necessarily need to spend a ton of money on advertising to remind people we're here when you're ready for us. But even just something playful, we were talking last night about, if I were a dry cleaner, wouldn't it be kind of fun to say, listen, we're sponsoring Taco Tuesday, or Wednesday is Prince Spaghetti Day, any of those sort of messier,
right.
Kind of things. Or if I were a car wash, I want to sponsor the off-road competition, and encourage everybody to do a little bit more of that. And I think, humor at the right time, can not only keep us re-engaged, it's great content to go viral, but keeps us top of mind, so that I'm going to, re-engage with you when the timing is right.
And that's a really cool idea for any dry cleaning businesses or anything like that. See how dirty we can get a shirt and then let's try to clean it. Simple things like that. Like, I would watch that. Like, let's see how white I can get this shirt after I dump a whole thing. And it's nothing, you're not telling me to buy your service, but you're engaging with me and I'm going to watch and I see your brand. So that's really the goal.
Right. Maybe a cooperative crossover with Ocean Spray or Concrete.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's cool. That's some good content.
A couple of quick slides here, and I think these are pretty interesting. When you think about, I guess I would describe it as sort of elective or optional, non-essential businesses, important, but non-essential, museums and theaters, when am I going to return to visit? There was kind of a mixed bag here. I was, I guess perhaps in some ways not surprised to see some people ready to jump in within a day or week, and others saying, I think I'm going to wait quite some time. So as we go to the next slide, I'll skip over this one for a second. We go to the next slide, and I think this goes back to Jay's question earlier. So what is it, and Chris, you were describing this a bit earlier, and you're with your personal experience, that is going to give us the confidence to go and re-engage with theaters and concert halls and business mixers, and what are the things that people want to see and hear? What were your takeaways from some of these findings?
Well, again, you got vaccine there, right? I mean, I think that's a knee-jerk sort of, well, I'm not doing anything until the vaccine. I do think that eases a bit, Paul, as we see things get less and less severe. I think when we took this survey, people were more, the situation was a little more dire, if you will. It was still really bad. So I think that is directly proportional to the time. And I think as we see cases go down, possibly things ease up, people's fears ease a little bit on that. Seeing others visit first doesn't really monkey see, monkey do sort of thing. It doesn't really have a strong effect, but I do see, organizational change, operational change. I think, again, the split in answers just goes to show you that, people will pick one thing, they'll pick another thing, but I think that you just have to do your best to do what you can. So you can make those changes. You can tell everybody what your organizational changes are. You can talk about social distancing, and then slowly people come back. And I just think that it all always comes back to that. We can't worry about the vaccine thing. That is going to be where it is, but we can take control of what you can control. And I think those bars indicate that there are people that are willing to come back if you show them that you're making some change.
Yep. And building, Jay, on your question, so there are a lot of businesses that are, either venues or associations that are member driven that derive all or majority of their income from larger events. And so while, some of them just legally can't re-engage with customers at this point, others, might have an opportunity to do so. So as I think about the associations, the ones that we've seen, and a lot of our friends at SA, the Empire State Society of Association executives, their leadership has been really helping businesses pivot and adapt. If my members all enjoyed getting together for the annual meeting and there was a lot of sharing of knowledge and content, Great, but I can't do that anymore. But my membership is completely displaced. How do I help people with job training and retooling their education and getting them better prepared? Changing to meet those needs, I think, is really critical. And if we've got some time at the end, Jay in particular, other people that are interested in what venues are doing, in our section on innovations we love, there are some really, really innovative approaches to what businesses are doing to derive some income.
Yeah, and also with that, just for everyone, the question, how do brands, businesses present their goods and services if they're tied to large events, concerts and festivals? This is obviously a challenge, but I think that those people that come to those events, if they're not happening or they're not going, they're still out there and they're still digitally engaged. So like one thing that we're trying to do at Overit is we're trying to leverage our studio, if you will, as a place where you can recreate an event. So if you have a product and you're trying to reach people, you can do it digitally. You can create your own little booth. If you had to go to for example, a conference, we can recreate that booth or recreate that exchange and have a virtual back and forth. Or maybe you have a sort of a virtual concert. I mean, there are ways, it's not the same, but there are ways to sort of engage or have similar events, but do it digitally where people are comfortable and will come and listen to what you have to say.
And on this slide, actually, there was a question that just came up that basically said, all right, we've got folks that are afraid to go to the supermarket. And yet at the same time, we see 15,000 people in Troy for rallies. So if we wait 10, 14 days, whatever the incubation period is, and we don't see a second spike, is that going to give us the confidence to say, well, wait a minute, I wasn't sure if going to the supermarket, but boy, 10, 15,000 people got together in Troy and there wasn't a spike. Maybe I'm going to feel more confident. So do we think people are going to be more confident, I believe is the question. And one of the things on this slide is, the blue finding here, will you be more confident to go to large group events if you see other people visiting first, or see that there really wasn't, in a lot of cases, it wasn't a very high score that said, well, if I see other people going, then I'll go. If I see other people going to rallies and not getting sick, maybe I'll feel okay about it. I think it might be a little soon to tell whether they're going to have that level of confidence, kind of moving forward. But, human nature being what it is, I think we've also seen people say, look, pandemic or not, I'm really sick of being cooped up in the house for 90 days. So I may, especially in our region where, again, we weren't hit as hard as other areas, start to emerge a little bit faster and start to want to re-engage a little bit faster. Chris, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I would say that we have these new measures, right? You got to wear a mask when you go out, and that gives people maybe a sense of feeling better and confident. And I think the data is going to start to come out to see how effective that is. As we reopen and we go out with these masks, we might have data that suggests that it's pretty good at reducing the spread, right? And so therefore, I think, okay, I feel a little more comfortable going out now. I just think it's like baby steps as we ease out of this. I know that there was a big study that just came out. I was reading from the World Health Organization that says now that asymptomatic carriers of the disease are very unlikely to spread it forward. I think there was this fear that, if you could be asymptomatic, especially kids, and spreading the virus all over the place. But now through really rigorous tracing methods that they're in South Korea and other these countries, they're starting to suggest that if you're not symptomatic, your ability to spread the virus is really low. If that in fact is true and holds, if you're not coughing all over the place or you're not actively sick, that changes the calculus, right? Because the fear and the anxiety always is, well, if I go into a bank or if I go into a grocery store and someone is there and they're talking to me from 3 feet away and they're not symptomatic, I can get it if they have it. Assume everyone has it. Well, the data might come out and say, well, that's not necessarily true. You're very, very low risk. So I think as that comes out, Paul, going out with these masks on, people will start to feel more comfortable, and I think the momentum will shift. I think we're starting to get there, and we'll see how that bears out.
Great question just popped up, Chris, about starting a new business. Is this a great time to be doing this? And there's obvious realities that the person posing the question said, you won't have brand recognition, but how challenging would it be at this time? My initial take on that is, I'm looking at it through the lens of whether the new business will succeed because it's solving a problem that nobody else has figured out how to solve, or it has a delivery mode that nobody else is doing. I think those businesses may be more successful, and especially the ones that adapt to new consumer behavior. I'm not sure exactly the type of business that we're describing, but home delivery services and things like that that meet the consumer needs. If it's technology based and it's virtual, more likely to succeed. But again, going back to something we mentioned earlier, I think if your business strategy is to take customers away from an existing brand, you may have a challenge. A, you have, as you pointed out, less brand recognition, but B, people are going to be a little hesitant to switch. They just don't want one more thing, one more point of uncertainty in their lives, depending on the type of business. Any thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, again, if you can solve a problem here, that's how I answered it. If your business can solve a problem that people have, especially now, because I feel like there are more problems to solve, go for it. I really do feel that way. If you have something that especially is unique and is speaking to the times, then there's no, I wouldn't say I would hold off. But if it is if it is an idea that was born before this, and possibly there's a lot of competition, there's not really a good way to differentiate it. The answer isn't don't do it necessarily, but rethink the approach before you go all out and really get into the market. But I feel like there's a lot of opportunity here. Paul will show you, I think, in these next slides where people are innovating. And if you have an innovation or you have a solution to problems, especially that are current, maybe those sales are just this time they're popular. But what you're doing is you're making your brand really shoot up, and then as you grow, you can sort of build your new services around it. So Paul, maybe this is a good segue, and then we can get back into the questions. Please keep asking questions. It's 8:40, Paul, but we're happy to continue. We're going to continue to just as questions come and answer them. So please just type in your questions.
So these are, as Chris mentioned, innovations that we love. These are businesses that have either created a new product or adapted their product or venue, in this case, going back to Jay's question, all specifically in response to the pandemic. And some really interesting stuff. There's a company called Work From Home Jammies, and I'm not sure how easily you can see this depending on the size of the screen. But the top half is all business, collared shirt, but the fabric and everything else, about it, especially from the chest down, is, sweatpants, Chris, we've seen a lot of businesses develop their own training. I mean, all you need is a laptop, and now you can innovate. You can basically compete perhaps on a local level with Peloton and some of those other major brands. Maybe this is a good jumping off point, Chris, with that training model in place. There was a question about perhaps the relationship with big box stores, or maybe in this case, the bigger box fitness centers. What do you see as maybe either the short or longer term impact to the more boutique fitness centers compared to the larger fitness?
Yeah, this is really interesting. Tanya, thanks for this question. Thoughts on shop local versus big box, does this trend continue? I find this to be really fascinating. I think that when we're talking about fitness, I honestly feel that the boutique and the smaller shop has their work cut out for them right now. They've built their model on building close-knit communities, getting a lot of people in a small space. And that is sort of antithetical to where we are: social distancing, space. And if they haven't adapted to go online in some way or really change up, they're gonna come out of this a little bit more injured, I feel, and they're gonna have some sort of a longer runway to get back. Whereas bigger box, they can accommodate people coming into the gym more sort of right away. So I think in fitness, there's a little bit of a difference there. But in terms of other things like groceries, Paul, shop local, I really think that this pandemic, if you will, could, if you really did it well, you could really make a mark as you come out. Meaning, the local groceries, I know that these big box, like the Price Shoppers or whatever, when it first started, it was really difficult. People were trying to order online. They couldn't get it. They were out of stock. But their smaller local shops were better stocked. They had more options, and they pivoted with some great delivery options. And so if you did that successfully, you might continue to keep that business from someone who would go to a bigger box. But I think it's up to you, the smaller box business, the smaller boutiques. you really have to keep that going now. You made your impact during this. You showed that you can sort of thrive in a bad situation. But I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to keep engaging. I'm going to keep you as my customer. So I think that yes, I think there could be a shift. And I do think people want to go local, but it's up to those smaller local businesses now to continue to engage and continue to let that customer know we have your back and here's how we're going to do it.
Yep. A few more things that we've seen that we just love. There are beaches now that actually are taking reservations for certain, sections of the beach. Jay, this one's for you. The empty runway. There's an airport in Europe that basically turned that into a drive-in theater since that wasn't being used. There's a Denmark football league that is putting up or has put up large screens across the field where season ticket holders can basically Zoom. So they can watch it from their seat or from the cameras mounted on each of these screens, but also have their presence in the stadium in a sense of just that, re-engaging with a crowd. Really interesting use of technology. On a much lower tech, earlier this week, South Korean baseball returned, but they still were practicing social distancing. They didn't want to put people in the stands, but they also didn't want to play in front of an empty stage or an empty stadium rather. And so they put stuffed animals in the first 5 or 7 rows, just to fill that out and just add a sense of fun.
This is what's happening at the Overit office right now. We have stuffed animals all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we should do that.
We should. This is great. I love this.
Yeah, Burger King in Germany had just tested, and again, it was a very tongue-in-cheek, but created those, the paper crowns that we've had since we were kids. But let's make these with, 3-foot diameter so that I can stay 6 feet away from everybody else. Again, it's not going to bring people in, but it is going to engage them. I think, probably one of the biggest takeaways and the themes from this conversation today is, don't trade short-term profits for long-term gains.
Right.
Long-term gains. Don't force it. Stay top of mind, stay engaged, weather the storm. And if you do it right, they're going to, re-engage with you when the time is right. We loved this. There's a new product that's being developed that they call it a toaster, but it basically uses UV light to disinfect your phone while it's charging. What a fabulous, very simple, low tech, solution to, what people are perceiving as a potential problem. And lastly, and again, this one's for Jay or anybody that's, working with larger venues, the AAA stadium in Pensacola, Florida, can't have the season start. They can't have their ticket holders visit, but they put up the entire stadium on Airbnb. So for $1,500 a night, 10 guests can share, 3 baths, 10 beds, all the places where the players would stay overnight, the traveling teams. But you can also play on the field all day. So what a great thing for a little league, or a group. They can stay socially distant within the larger sleeping quarters. But for $1,500 a night, you can not only earn a little bit of income, while you also look to stay top of mind with something that's, gone viral, and people are talking about. Mm-hmm. So I know, Chris, we wanted to leave a few minutes at the end. I know a lot of folks had stayed with us through this. I guess want to just take a minute now. First, thank you, everybody. See if there were any other questions. I guess one thing that we didn't talk about, Chris, was how we message and speak to consumers at this phase and at this stage. Are we being tone deaf, in your opinion, if we're not going out and saying, something specific about the pandemic and then about our business? What's your point of view on that?
Yeah, I would say right now, Paul, I don't think it's tone deaf to not speak about COVID in your messaging right now. Again, not addressing that it happened. So, if you just ignore this thing completely happened and you just turn the lights back on and you're, hey, we're open for business, no problem. I think that's a little bit, I don't think that's the right approach, but I do think that, people people are kind of tired of seeing it on the commercials, hearing about it all the time. At least that's my take and from what I'm hearing around. So I don't think it's wrong to not want to put that in you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to bring it back up and put it in the messaging. But again, you just do have to highlight what you have learned. Everybody has learned something through this, and everybody is changing, hopefully in some way through this. How have you learned? What have you learned? How have you changed? Make that the message. Make that what you're putting out there. You don't necessarily have to talk about it. Do you agree, Paul?
I do. I know we saw the Albany subreddit group or community, and there were hundreds of upvotes where people were like, okay, we get it. Your commercials all say, this. And so the consumer on some level with that piece of data in mind got tired pretty quickly of it. And they may not necessarily want to be reminded of all we went through, but really want to start to look forward and be optimistic. So, perhaps the nod to what we went through is really messaging that's a bit more optimistic. So as we move forward and things like that, we don't necessarily need to look backward. Actually, Chris, interesting question that just popped up. What's the impact to the upcoming election on people? Is there, and there is, this person's commenting and saying, there is a red-blue thought process on the severity of COVID. This pandemic in some ways was politicized. Are people going to be tired, and wanting to tune out the fall rhetoric, as much as they may want to leave this behind them?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are going to be tired in general, Paul. And I think that a presidential election at this level of rhetoric that is going on in politics is going to leave people feeling just, I'm not saying this on purpose, but they're over it. And so, like what I did there. And so I feel like, again, opportunities for brands to be, a stable presence, be something that is just right there for them. There's going to be a lot of people with a lot of, craziness, and there's a lot of people that are going to tune it out. So somewhere in the middle, find your sweet spot as a brand, offer someone that stability. Don't really engage. Unless you're part of, in the political world and you have to, but if you don't engage, just present a place where you're wearing funny 3-foot round hats that let people laugh, or, throwing spaghetti at a white shirt. People are going to be looking for that, like a little bit of comic relief, or a little bit of like, okay, I just need a break from all of this. And that's why I feel like it's not necessary to put that messaging in at the moment. So yeah, I do think the election and all the rhetoric will play into it, but you don't have to engage as a brand, and you can offer that sort of, middle ground place where people can go.
Sure, and keeping in mind some of the basics of crisis communication, we use in our training with our clients the acronym PAIR, like the fruit, and that stands for people, environment, assets, and reputation. And that's the order in which you deal with things in a crisis, and that's the order in which you speak to things in a crisis. People first, then you talk about and worry about the environment. So in this case, and unlike what we saw, for instance, with the CEO of BP after the Deepwater Horizon tragedy, he was quickly out there being very selfish about his response, and he wasn't putting people first. He basically said, look, I want to get back to normal. I'm ready to move on, and I want to put this behind me, forgetting that 11 of his employees were killed on that, and I think in general, we've all sort of put people first. We've celebrated those frontline heroes. We've, talked about the concerns, and we've expressed that. And at the right time, and it's starting to feel like that is the right time, to your point, Chris, I think we can start to move forward. Obviously, the environment was less of an issue for this pandemic. So now we can start to worry about our business assets and lastly, our business reputation. And so I don't think we need to go out with a brooding message. If your brand hasn't already said, gosh, wasn't this awful, what we all lived through, but we all got through it together, don't feel like you need to start that as part of the conversation, but let's move forward, with that sense of, and I guess what I'm hearing you say, that one of the themes that I'm picking up from you on this, Chris, is we want control, but we also want that sense of optimism, comfort. And I think that's going to alleviate a lot of our anxieties moving forward. And so if your brand is communicating those tones and messages, perhaps those are the ones that are going to be more successful.
Interesting question, Paul, that I think is relevant. And it'll be nice to get your take as well. How do you approach the data or numbers a business is generating during the pandemic? Another, with your KPIs, do projections need to be readjusted? So this is an interesting question. You go into the year with a set of KPIs and you have projections, and sometimes you've done those out years, and nobody sort of builds in, well, what if we have a pandemic and everything shuts down? I'm sure that's not in the calculus. So now you have these numbers that are going to be skewed, and you have presentations to make to a board, or you have to look at that. Do you readjust? Do you say, well, this was an off year. Let me just, we could change the projections a little bit. So I'll give you a quick take, and then Paul, I'd like to hear yours. I mean, every business is going to make that decision. It's a business decision, whether people want to say, you know what, we're going to leave the projections as they were. We're going to see how far we fell, or how much we rose. Others might say, you know what, we're going to alter these projections by 10%, give ourselves a little bit of a buffer. And I think you can make arguments either way. But I think the most important thing you should be doing right now, and hopefully all of the time, is gathering the data as it's coming in. Because I really feel like in times that are severe like this, you really can get a sense of who your customers are, right? You're going to see people leave, and you're going to see people stay. The people that stay are really valuable. Who are they? What ages are they? What do they like? Why are they staying? All of that information is really important and can really help guide you when things come back online. Also, who are the people that left? Where have you seen the biggest drop? Which services have declined the most? And maybe you need to start asking yourself about those services. Maybe you don't need them anymore when this comes back. Maybe you've been looking to get rid of or consolidate, and that sort of answer the question for you. So I would say business decision on the projections, but make sure you're keeping your data coming in, and use this data during a difficult time to drive you forward, because you're going to learn a lot about who the customers are in a time of crisis.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And for looking at it from a different point of view. So this economic crisis hit faster and deeper than anything that we lived through. It hit harder and faster and deeper than 9/11, than the housing crisis, than the dot-com bubble, all the things that I weathered through my career and gray hair to prove it. And because of that, we had to throw out all of the usual reporting timelines. So most businesses would look at things quarterly. Most economists and labor statistics came out monthly. But this, in particular, the unemployment levels fell off a cliff in matters of days and weeks. And so economists were struggling to catch up with what was happening. By the time I get done with a quarterly report, our entire economy lost 40 million jobs and our GDP went down X%. So to your point, if you're not looking at the data and that's probably one of the biggest things. How your business changes its projections and KPIs will vary by business. But you've got to be looking at the data, and you've got to be looking at it more frequently than you had in the past. Now, we're not going to drop as fast or continue to drop as fast, thankfully. Mm-hmm. And the biggest concern, I guess, or the biggest thing we should be watching for is how the data shows what pace is our particular business or organization recovering. But I think if, the businesses that were looking at data that decided to look at it faster, I know even at Overit, we built internal committees and we decided to meet weekly to look at what was happening around us for not only our clients, but even for our own business. I think that's essential. And I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I would have from this conversation is, am I looking at my data? Am I looking at it frequently enough in order to make decisions that I need for our business? And for me, that was probably one of the biggest lessons learned, was identifying, it just wasn't like, oh, I think we're going to be out of, working from home for a few weeks. Once I had that mindset, it was only a matter of 2 or 3 days later that I was like, wow, 40 million people are out of work, and now what does that mean for our clients, and what does that mean for our own business? I know we're coming up on 9 o'clock. Might have time for one more question if I can figure out how to move
I got a quick one here.
Yep.
Question about traditional versus digital marketing. asking, are you still suggesting to clients to market through traditional means, billboard, TV, or has digital sort of taken over as the best way to reach? So really quick, Paul, I think what this time has shown and reinforced is that digital marketing is the most nimble, and it is the quickest way to reach people at different levels at different times. So this thing hits, you want to get a message out, digital is your answer, because you can quickly turn, you can quickly pivot, you can get your messaging out. I would suggest to people and businesses that if you weren't marketing on digital platforms before this, hopefully you've done so now, and you're going to keep doing that. And I'm not discounting traditional marketing now or later. I think we're slowly been easing. We've done really well with clients on TV, Paul, during this time, right? So I think that there is there is room for it, but the emphasis is on digital being so nimble. And like you just said, how many people lost their jobs in a short amount of time? You need to be able to respond quickly, and digital marketing allows you to do that. So that's if your game is being quick and nimble, digital is where it is.
Yeah, I agree. I think even moving forward, still advertising on news programming. Traditional will see a resurgence, but I think it'll take a while before we build up the commuting patterns that we did and the media types that rely on that. But it certainly is on its way. So I think we're going to leave it there. We're coming up on 9 o'clock and thank you. It looked like the majority of folks stayed with us, far longer than the half hour that we initially thought, but hopefully you found this conversation of value. We're going to be doing some more of these again in the future, updates on our surveys as well as other insights. So thanks for sticking with us. Enjoy the rest of the day. Chris, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Again, I mean, if you guys have questions, please send them in, and we're happy to put them or post them somewhere and get answers back. We're going to be doing more of these. In particular, we'll do some marketing panels and speak specifically about things like that. So have a great day. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate the time. Thanks, Paul.
Everyone.